She clutched the cursed object like it was the only thing keeping her alive, but Horyuchi knew better. The moment he saw the blood seeping from beneath her white knuckles, he understood that what she held wasn't salvation. It was damnation wrapped in leather and bone, and if he didn't act fast, the desert would claim another soul before sunrise. The New Mexico territory stretched endless and unforgiving under the merciless afternoon sun, a landscape of red clay and scattered sage, where survival wasn't guaranteed and mercy was rarer than water. Lorraine Westin stumbled through the canyon bottom, her once fine dress now torn to ribbons, her boots held together by sheer will and fraying leather strips she'd tied around. She clutched the cursed object like it was the only thing keeping her alive. But Horyuchi knew better. The moment he saw the blood seeping from beneath her white knuckles, he understood that what she held wasn't salvation. It was damnation wrapped in leather and bone, and if he didn't act fast, the desert would claim another soul before sunrise. Them 3 days ago. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling in tangled waves across her face, sticking to the sweat and dust that coated her skin like a second layer. But none of that mattered. Not the heat that made the air shimmer and dance. Not the thirst that had turned her tongue to sandpaper. Not the bleeding blisters on her feet that left a faint trail of crimson in the dust behind her. What mattered was the object clutched against her chest. A medicine bag, old and weathered, its leather darkened by age, and something else. Something that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Her fingers had locked around it so tightly that her knuckles had gone bone white. And beneath her grip, fresh blood seeped through the cracks between her fingers, dripping slowly onto the parched earth below. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her at first. The wind carried too many sounds in the canyon, the whisper of sand against rock, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead, the rustle of dried brush tumbling across the desert floor. But when she finally sensed the presence, felt that prickling awareness that comes when you're being watched, she spun around with wild eyes. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her chest heaving, her face streaked with tears that had cut clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. Standing not 20 feet away was a Navajo man, tall and lean, his long black hair tied back with a strip of red cloth, his weathered face unreadable as carved stone. He wore traditional clothing, a woven shirt decorated with geometric patterns in earth tones, leather leggings that showed the wear of many miles traveled, and moccasins that had made no sound on the canyon floor. In his hand, he carried a walking stick carved with symbols she didn't recognize, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the harsh sunlight. And across his back was a pack that looked well-traveled and practical, bulging with supplies that spoke of a man who knew how to survive in this merciless landscape. His eyes, dark and steady as river stones, were fixed not on her face, but on the medicine bag pressed against her chest. There was something in those eyes, recognition mixed with horror, the look of a man who had just seen a ghost he thought was long buried. Lorraine stumbled backward, nearly losing her footing on the loose rock that covered the canyon floor like treacherous marbles. Her voice came out as a broken rasp, barely more than a whisper torn from a throat that had screamed itself raw over the past days. "Stay back. Don't come any closer." She held the bag tighter, if that was even possible, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and something deeper. Fear. Raw, primal fear that went beyond physical danger. The kind of fear that lives in the soul and spreads like poison through every thought and breath. "You can't have it. I won't let you take it." Her words tumbled out faster now, desperate and pleading, each syllable edged with hysteria. "I know what you're thinking. I know what everyone thinks. But they're wrong. They're all wrong. This is mine. It chose me. It needs me." Horyuchi didn't move. He simply stood there, his expression unchanging, his eyes still locked on the medicine bag with the intensity of a man watching a fire that threatens to consume everything he holds dear. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and calm, the kind of voice that carries weight without volume, the kind that speaks of wisdom earned through hard years and harder lessons. "You don't know what you're holding, woman." His English was accented but clear, each word measured and deliberate, chosen with the care of a man who understands that words have power. "That bag doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to anyone anymore. The man who made it is dead, has been for 3 winters now. And the things inside it, the medicine he put there, they are not meant for the living. They are not meant for anyone." Lorraine shook her head violently, her tangled hair whipping across her face like dark serpents. "You're lying. You're just like the others. You want to take it from me. You want to destroy it because you're afraid of what it can do." Her voice cracked like dry wood splitting, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting new trails through the dust and grime. "But I've seen it. I've seen what it can do. It saved me. When everyone else abandoned me, when they locked me away and told me I was mad, when they said I was possessed by demons and tried to beat the evil out of me with switches and prayer, it was there. It spoke to me through the darkness. It showed me the way out. It promised me I would never be helpless again." The Navajo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a muscle jumping beneath the copper skin. He took a single step forward, slow and deliberate, his moccasin barely making a sound on the stone, moving with the patience of a hunter who knows that one wrong move will send the prey bolting. "Listen to me carefully and listen well. That bag is soaked in dark medicine, blood medicine, the kind that corrupts everything it touches, that turns beauty into ugliness, that transforms protection into destruction. The man who made it, he was my uncle. Tsinayani, we called him. Grey Cloud. He walked a bad path, turned away from the beauty way that keeps us in balance with all things, sought power in places no man should go. He made deals with spirits that should never be spoken to, offered sacrifices that should never be given. When he died, the elders burned his hogan to purify the ground where he had lived. They scattered the ashes to the 4 winds. They took that bag and buried it deep in the canyon where no one would find it, wrapped it in white sage and blessed cornmeal, sang the prayers that would keep it sleeping. His eyes finally lifted to meet hers, and in them she saw something that chilled her more than his words. Pity. Deep, profound pity mixed with an ancient sadness. "How long have you been holding it?" Lorraine's breath hitched in her chest. Her grip on the bag loosened just a fraction, and more blood seeped through her fingers, thick and dark, too dark to be entirely her own. She looked down at her hands as if seeing them for the first time, truly seeing them. The skin was raw and torn in places, blistered and peeling, and beneath the blood was something else. Dark lines like veins, but wrong, all wrong, spreading up from her palms toward her wrists like the roots of some poisonous plant burrowing into her flesh. Black and pulsing with a rhythm that didn't match her heartbeat. She stared at them in horror, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish pulled from water. "I don't understand. I thought it was helping me. I thought it was giving me strength. I thought, how long?" Hodiuchi's voice was sharper now, more urgent, cutting through her confusion like a knife through fog. 5 days, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that had begun to pick up, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain that would likely never fall. "Maybe 6. I lost count after the 3rd night. The days started bleeding together. Her legs began to shake, trembling like branches in a storm, and she swayed on her feet, nearly toppling over before catching herself. "I found it in the canyon. I was running. My husband, Her voice broke completely, shattering into pieces, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, trying desperately to hold back a sob that threatened to tear her apart from the inside. "He sold me, like I was cattle. Like I was a horse or a sack of grain or a piece of furniture he no longer needed. To a man named Dutch Carver, a man who runs a saloon in Santa Rosa, but everyone knows what really happens in the rooms upstairs. Everyone knows what kind of business he really conducts. My husband owed him money, a lot of money, gambling debts that had piled up over months, maybe years. And when he couldn't pay, when Dutch came to collect and there was nothing left to give, he gave him me instead." The words came out bitter and broken, each one a knife twisting in her chest, reopening wounds that had never properly healed. I ran. I waited until they were drunk, until my husband passed out at the table and Dutch went outside to smoke his cigar, and I took a horse from the stable and rode until it collapsed beneath me from exhaustion. Then I walked. I walked until my feet bled and my throat closed up from thirst and I couldn't remember what my own name was anymore. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. I would rather die in this desert than go back to that. And then I found the bag. It was just lying there, half buried in the sand near a dried-up creek bed, as if it had been waiting for me. And when I picked it up, when my fingers closed around that leather, I heard a voice, clear as day. It told me it would protect me. It told me I would never be powerless again. It told me that anyone who tried to hurt me would pay in blood. Odyuchi closed his eyes briefly, and his lips moved in what might have been a prayer. Words in his own language that flowed like water over smooth stones. When he opened them again, his expression had hardened into something resolute, the soft pity replaced by grim determination. The bag lies. That's what dark medicine does. It promises strength, protection, power. It whispers all the things you want to hear, shows you visions of yourself standing tall while your enemies fall. But it takes more than it gives, always. And what it takes, you can never get back. Your spirit, your humanity, your very soul, it consumes them piece by piece until there's nothing left but hunger and shadow. He stepped closer, and this time there was no hesitation in his movement, no caution, just purposeful strides that closed the distance between them. You need to let it go. Right now, before the corruption spreads too far, before it reaches your heart, no! Lorraine's scream tore through the canyon, echoing off the red walls and bouncing back at them from a dozen directions, as if the earth itself was crying out in protest. She backed away, stumbling over rocks, her torn boots catching on stones, nearly falling but somehow keeping her balance through sheer desperate will. You don't understand. You can't possibly understand. If I let it go, I'm nothing. I'm just a woman with no money, no family, no protection. Dutch Carver will find me. He has men, trackers, people who know this territory like the back of their hands. My husband will drag me back. I'll be sold again or worse. They'll make an example of me. They'll show every other woman what happens when you try to run. Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch, cracking and breaking, but somehow growing louder. This is the only thing standing between me and hell. Don't you see that? Don't you understand? Without it, I'm dead. I'm worse than dead. I understand more than you know, Odyuchi said quietly, his voice dropping back down to that calm, steady tone that seemed to carry more weight than any shout could. His eyes softened just slightly, and for a moment the hard lines of his face eased, revealing glimpses of old pain buried deep beneath the weathered exterior. My sister, her name was Deed. She was taken too. Not sold, but stolen. By raiders when she was 14 winters old. Barely more than a child, still learning the women's songs from our mother. They came at night, burned half our village, killed my father and 2 of my brothers. They took her north, and we never saw her again. I tracked them for 2 full moons, barely stopping to eat or sleep, following their trail across 3 territories. Found their camp in the mountains. But I was too late. His voice didn't waver. But there was an old pain buried deep in those words, a wound that had scarred over, but never truly healed, still tender when pressed. She was already gone. Not dead, but gone in a way that was maybe worse. They had broken something inside her that couldn't be fixed. When I tried to bring her home, she didn't even recognize me, didn't remember her own name. So yes, I know what it is to be powerless, to watch someone you love be treated like property, like something less than human. But that bag won't save you. It will consume you. And when it's done, when it has taken everything you are and everything you might have been, there will be nothing left but hunger and shadow and rage. Lorraine stared at him, her chest heaving, her whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm. The blood from her hands dripped steadily now, pattering on the ground like the rain that never seemed to fall in this cursed desert. Each drop leaving a dark stain on the pale sand. The black veins had spread further up her arms, creeping past her wrists, visible now even through the torn fabric of her sleeves. climbing toward her elbows like dark fingers reaching for her heart. She looked down at them again, and this time she couldn't deny what she was seeing. The corruption, the poison, working its way through her body like ink, spreading through water. Her hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely keep her grip on the bag. "Please," she whispered, and the word came out so small, so broken, barely more than a breath. "I don't want to die. I don't want to become something else. But I'm so afraid. I'm so tired of being afraid." "Then let it go. Let it go, and I will help you. I swear it on my sister's memory, on the graves of my father and brothers. I will not let them take you back." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of dust and sage, and something else, something acrid and wrong, like burning hair or rotting meat left too long in the sun. Lorraine's hands trembled violently, and slowly, so slowly it seemed to take forever, her fingers began to loosen their death grip on the medicine bag. Tears streamed down her face, carving clean paths through the layers of grime. Her lips moved in what might have been a prayer, or might have been a goodbye to the false promise of power that had sustained her through days of hell. But just as she started to pull it away from her chest, just as her fingers began to release, her eyes went wide. Her pupils dilated until they were almost entirely black, swallowing the color, turning her gaze into something inhuman. And when she spoke again, her voice was different, deeper, layered with something that wasn't entirely her own, as if multiple voices were speaking through her throat at once. "You can't have it. It's mine. We are bound now, blood to blood, bone to bone. She fed me with her suffering. She watered me with her tears. She is mine." Horyuchi's expression shifted instantly, the careful patience evaporating in a heartbeat. Without hesitation, without warning, he lunged forward, his hand shooting out to grab the medicine bag with the speed of a striking snake. Lorraine screamed, a sound of pure anguish and rage mixed together, inhuman and terrible, and tried to yank it back with strength that shouldn't have been possible for someone in her condition. But the Navajo was faster, stronger, driven by desperate purpose. His fingers closed around the leather, feeling the unnatural warmth of it, the pulse of something alive and malevolent beneath the surface. With one swift, powerful motion, he ripped it from her hands. The sound of tearing flesh filled the air as her palms, stuck to the leather by dried blood and corruption, were torn open. The moment the bag left her grip, Lorraine's scream cut off abruptly, as if someone had sliced through her vocal cords with a knife. Her body went rigid, every muscle locking at once, her back arching unnaturally. Her eyes rolled back in her head until only the white showed, and she collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, crumpling to the ground in a heap of torn fabric and tangled hair. Horyuchi stood over her unconscious form, the medicine bag now clutched in his hand, his chest heaving from the brief struggle. He held it carefully, almost reverently, but his face was grim as carved granite. Slowly, he turned the bag over, examining it in the fading light of the desert afternoon. The leather was old, ancient even, and covered in symbols painted in what looked like dried blood, spirals and crosses and shapes that hurt to look at too long. The stitching was done with what appeared to be sinew, yellow with age and pulled tight. But it was what he saw beneath his fingers that made his jaw clench hard enough to ache. Blood. Fresh blood. Not from the bag itself, but from Lorraine's hands. It had soaked into the leather, been absorbed by it, feeding it like water feeds a dying plant. And now, as he held it up to the failing light, he could see something moving inside. Not physically, not in any way his eyes could properly perceive, but spiritually. Shadows that writhed and twisted behind the leather, hungry and alive and furious at being separated from their host. He looked down at the woman lying motionless at his feet, sprawled in the dust like a broken doll. Her hands were torn and raw, the palms shredded where the bag had been literally bonded to her flesh. The black veins were still visible but no longer spreading, frozen in place like dark rivers on a map leading nowhere. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that suggested life, however tenuous. She would live, for now, But the question that hung in the desert air, heavy and unanswered like storm clouds that promise rain but never deliver, was whether she would ever truly be free of what she had unleashed. Whether the darkness that had taken root in her soul could ever be pulled out completely, or whether some part of it would remain dormant and waiting, ready to bloom again the moment weakness or desperation created the right conditions. The canyon walls turned gold, then crimson as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of fire and blood. Chi worked quickly, his movements practiced and efficient as he gathered dry brush and built a small fire in the shelter of an overhanging rock face. The flames caught and grew, pushing back the growing shadows that seemed to creep closer with every passing minute. He had dragged Lorraine's unconscious body to a flat piece of ground near the fire, positioning her carefully on her back with her head slightly elevated on his rolled-up pack. Her breathing had stabilized, but she hadn't stirred since collapsing, her face pale as bleached bone in the flickering firelight. The medicine bag sat on a flat rock 10 feet away, wrapped now in white cloth that Chi had pulled from his supplies. Even covered, even separated from its host, he could feel its presence like a physical weight pressing against his chest. The spirits inside were angry. He could sense their fury radiating from the leather like heat from sun-baked stone. They had been feeding, growing stronger with each drop of blood Lorraine had unknowingly offered them, and now they had been ripped away from their source. Hungry things always fought hardest when starving. He pulled a smaller leather pouch from his pack, this one worn smooth with age and use, decorated with turquoise beads and symbols of protection. Inside were items he had carried for years, tools of his trade as a medicine man, though he rarely used that title. Sacred tobacco, cornmeal blessed by the elders, sage that had been harvested at dawn during the proper ceremonies, small crystals that caught and reflected light in ways that seemed to defy natural law. He had learned the healing ways from his grandfather, learned how to walk the line between the physical world and the spirit world, how to speak to things that most people couldn't see and didn't want to believe existed. But he had also learned the darker knowledge, the things his grandfather had shared only in whispers, warnings about the price of power and the corruption that came from seeking strength through blood and pain. Lorraine stirred, a soft moan escaping her cracked lips. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open, and her hands twitched at her sides, fingers curling and uncurling, as if still trying to grip something that was no longer there. Chi moved to her side, kneeling in the dust, and gently lifted her head to pour a small amount of water between her lips. She choked at first, coughing weakly, but then swallowed, her throat working reflexively. He gave her more, just a little at a time, knowing that too much too fast would make her sick. Her eyes finally opened, unfocused at first, staring up at the darkening sky as if trying to remember where she was or how she had gotten there. "Easy," Chi said softly, his hands supporting the back of her head. "You're safe. The bag is gone. You're free of it now." His words were meant to comfort, but even as he spoke them, he wondered if they were true. The physical connection had been severed, yes, but spiritual corruption didn't always leave clean wounds. Lorraine's eyes found his face, and for a moment there was nothing but confusion in her gaze. Then memory came flooding back, and with it a cascade of emotions that played across her features, like shadows dancing in firelight. Fear, relief, shame, anger, all of it crashing together in a wave that made her entire body shudder. She tried to sit up, but her strength failed her and she fell back against his pack with a gasp of pain. Her hands came up instinctively, and she stared at her palms in the firelight. The skin was torn and raw, the wounds deep enough in places that white bone showed through. The black veins were still there, dark lines running up her forearms, but they had faded somewhat, no longer pulsing with that sickening rhythm. "What did you do to me?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a rasp, but there was accusation in it, fear mixed with something that might have been betrayal. "I felt it. When you took the bag, I felt something rip, like you tore out part of my insides." Fresh tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her temples to disappear into her matted hair. It hurts. Everything hurts. And I can still hear it, whispering, calling to me, telling me to take it back. Hoduchi set the water skin aside and sat back on his heels, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. The bag created a bond with you, fed on your blood, your pain, your desperation. When I broke that bond, it left a wound, not just in your flesh, but in your spirit. That wound will take time to heal, if it heals at all. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The whispers you hear, they will fade. But you must be strong. If you reach for the bag again, if you try to reconnect with what's inside it, the bond will reform. And next time it will be stronger. Next time, you might not be able to break free. She closed her eyes, and more tears leaked out from beneath her lids. I don't understand any of this. I don't understand what that thing is, or why it chose me, or what it wants. Her voice broke. I just wanted to be safe. I just wanted to stop being afraid. Is that so wrong? Is wanting to protect yourself from monsters really such a terrible sin? There are no sins here, Hoduchi said quietly. Only choices and consequences. You chose survival. The bag offered you a path, and you took it because you saw no other way. I don't condemn you for that. But now you must choose again. Will you let the darkness go, or will you hold on to it because letting go feels like giving up the only power you've ever had? He stood, moving back to the fire to add more wood, his movements slow and deliberate. I knew a man once, a warrior from my clan. He was captured by enemies, tortured for days. They took his pride, his strength, everything that made him who he was. When he finally escaped, he found a dark path, learned blood magic from a witch who lived in the mountains. He became powerful, feared. No one dared touch him again. But the magic changed him, made him cruel, made him hungry for violence. In the end, he attacked his own family during a ceremony, killed his nephew and wounded his sister before the other warriors put him down like a rabid dog. Hoduchi's voice remained steady, but there was old pain there, carefully controlled. Power gained through darkness always demands payment. Always. The rain was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars that had begun to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. The desert night was coming fast, bringing with it the cold that always followed the brutal heat of day. She could feel it already, creeping into her bones, making her shiver despite the fire. The man who made that bag, she said finally, her voice small. Your uncle. What happened to him? How did he die? Hoduchi's jaw tightened, and he was silent for so long that Lorraine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words came slow and heavy, weighted with a burden he had carried for years. He didn't die from sickness or age or even violence. The darkness consumed him from the inside. Started with his hands, the same black veins you have now. They spread up his arms, across his chest, down his legs. The healers tried everything, every ceremony, every prayer, every medicine they knew. Nothing worked. In the end, the corruption reached his heart, and he simply stopped. Like a fire burning out when it runs out of fuel. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks that danced into the night sky. Before he died, he was in agony, screaming about things crawling under his skin, shadows eating him from the inside. He begged us to kill him, to end it quickly, but we couldn't. Our ways don't allow for that. So we sat with him and sang the death songs while he suffered. His eyes met hers across the fire. That's what waits at the end of the path you were walking. That's what the bag would have done to you eventually. The fire crackled and popped, filling the silence that stretched between them. Lorraine's hands were shaking again, not from the bag's influence this time, but from the horror of what she had heard. The narrow escape she had made from a fate worse than anything Dutch Carver or her husband could have inflicted. She looked down at her torn palms, at the black veins that marked her like brands, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not her heart, but something deeper, the hard shell of anger and desperation she had built around herself to survive. Tears came then, real tears, not the hysterical sobs of earlier, but the quiet, exhausted crying of someone who has finally reached their limit. Hoduchi rose and moved to his pack, pulling out a thin blanket woven in traditional patterns of red and black and white. He draped it over her shivering form, then returned to the fire, giving her space for her grief. The desert night deepened around them, and in the distance a coyote howled, its voice high and lonely against the vast emptiness. The coyotes answered, their chorus rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. It was the sound of the desert, wild and untamed, and utterly indifferent to human suffering. "I can't go back," Lorraine said eventually, her voice muffled by the blanket she had pulled up to her chin. "Even without the bag, even if the corruption fades, I can't go back to Santa Rosa. Dutch Carver won't stop looking for me. He has a reputation to protect. If word gets out that someone escaped from him, that a woman he paid for managed to slip away, others might try the same. He'll make an example of me." She turned her head to look at Hodyuchi. "And my husband. God help me, I hate him more than I've ever hated anyone. He sold me, his own wife, the woman he made vows to before God and witnesses. How does someone do that? Oh, does someone look at another human being and decide they're worth less than a gambling debt?" Hodyuchi's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been understanding or shared pain. "I cannot answer that. I have seen men do terrible things, things that made no sense to me. Cruelty seems to come naturally to some people, as easy as breathing, but dwelling on the why of it will only poison you further. The question now is what you will do next, where you will go, who you will become now that you're no longer the woman who was sold, and no longer the woman who carried dark magic. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." She hadn't thought that far ahead. Her entire focus had been on immediate survival, on the next step, the next breath, the next moment of staying alive and free. The idea of a future, of choices and possibilities that extended beyond the next sunrise, felt foreign and overwhelming. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no money, no skills beyond keeping house and tending a garden. I can't read or write more than my own name. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go?" "There are places," Hodyuchi said thoughtfully. "Towns where no one knows your name or your story. Places where a woman can work honestly, earn her own way. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. But it's possible." He paused, then added, "Or you could come with me, for a time at least. Until you're healed enough to make your own path." Lorraine's eyes widened in surprise. "Come with you? Why would you help me? You don't know me. I brought dark magic into this canyon. I could have corrupted this entire place with my stupidity and desperation. Why would you want me anywhere near you?" Hodyuchi's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more a softening of his usually stern features. "Because I know what it is to be lost. Because my sister would have wanted someone to help her when she needed it most, and no one did. Because the spirits led me to this canyon today, and I don't believe in coincidence." He stood and moved to where the wrapped medicine bag sat on its rock. "Tomorrow, I will take this thing to a sacred place I know, a place where the earth is strong and the spirits of protection are powerful. I will bury it properly, with the right ceremonies and prayers. It will take most of the day to complete the ritual. You can come with me if you're strong enough, or you can rest here by the fire and wait for my return." She watched him through the firelight, this strange man who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to speak. There was something solid about him, something unchanging and reliable, like the canyon walls themselves. He had saved her life twice now, first by taking the bag, and then by offering her a path forward when she had been certain there was none. "I'll come with you," she said quietly. "I need to see it buried. I need to know it's really gone and can't hurt anyone else." Hodyuchi nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps approval. "Then we leave at first light. The place I'm taking it is a half-day's walk from here, deeper into the canyon, where the walls narrow and the spirits gather. It's not an easy journey, especially for someone in your condition. But I think you're stronger than you believe." Lorraine didn't respond, just pulled the blanket tighter around herself and stared into the flames. Stronger than she believed. She didn't feel strong. She felt broken and used and hollow, like a vessel that had been emptied of everything that once gave it purpose. But maybe that was what strength looked like sometimes. Maybe strength wasn't about never breaking. Maybe it was about continuing to breathe, continuing to move forward, even after everything inside you had shattered into pieces too small to count. The night deepened, and the temperature dropped further. Hodyuchi built up the fire until it blazed bright enough to push back the darkness for several feet in all directions. He positioned himself between Lorraine and the wrapped medicine bag, a silent guardian keeping watch over both the living and the dangerous. Neither of them spoke much after that. There was a comfortable quality to the silence. The kind that comes when words have said all they can, and what remains must be processed in the quiet spaces of the mind. Lorraine drifted in and out of an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with whispers and shadows, and the sensation of something pulling at her, trying to drag her back down into darkness. Each time she woke with a start, her heart pounding, and her hands reaching instinctively for the bag that was no longer there, she would find Hodyuchi still awake, still watching, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos of her recovering mind. Gradually, as the night wore on and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, the whispers grew quieter. The pull weakened. The wounds in her spirit, invisible but no less real than the torn flesh of her palms, began their slow and painful healing just before dawn, when the sky had turned that particular shade of deep blue that comes in the hour before sunrise. Lorraine finally fell into a deeper sleep, one untroubled by whispers or shadows. Hodyuchi watched her for a moment, seeing in her face the echoes of his sister, of all the women who had suffered at the hands of cruel men and an indifferent world. Then he turned his attention to the east, waiting for the sun to rise and bring with it the light they would need for the journey ahead. The medicine bag sat silent on its rock, wrapped in white cloth, waiting. The spirits inside were quiet now, conserving their strength, biding their time. But Hodyuchi knew that quiet didn't mean defeated. It only meant patient. And patience, in things that fed on darkness and desperation, was perhaps the most dangerous quality of all. Dawn broke over the canyon in layers of amber and rose, painting the red rock walls with colors that seemed to glow from within. Lorraine woke to the smell of something cooking, a thin stew made from dried meat and wild roots that Hodyuchi had gathered in the pre-dawn darkness. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, every muscle stiff and protesting as she pushed herself up to sitting. The blanket fell away from her shoulders, and the morning cold hit her like a slap, making her gasp. Her hands throbbed with a deep, bone-level pain that made her vision swim when she tried to flex her fingers. The torn palms had crusted over with dried blood during the night, the wounds ugly and raw in the morning light. Hodyuchi looked up from the small pot he had suspended over the fire on a framework of green sticks. His face showed the weariness of a man who had not slept, dark circles under his eyes and new lines etched around his mouth, but his movements remained steady and purposeful. "Eat," he said simply, ladling some of the stew into a wooden bowl and holding it out to her. "The journey ahead will test you. You need strength." She took the bowl with trembling hands, nearly dropping it when pain lanced through her palms. The stew was simple, barely seasoned, but to someone who hadn't eaten in days, it tasted like the finest meal ever prepared. She forced herself to eat slowly, knowing that her shrunken stomach would rebel if she tried to consume too much too fast. Between careful spoonfuls, she watched Hodyuchi as he moved around the camp, gathering his supplies, checking the wrappings on the medicine bag with the cautious movements of someone handling a venomous snake. The bag itself seemed different in the morning light, smaller somehow, less threatening, but she could still feel its presence, like a cold spot in the air. "A place where warmth went to die. How far is this sacred place?" she asked, her voice still rough from screaming and dehydration. "You said half a day's walk, but I don't know if I can manage that. My feet are torn up and my hands, I can barely hold this bowl without wanting to cry." Hodyuchi didn't look at her as he answered, his attention focused on securing his pack. "The distance is what it is. Whether you can manage it or not, that is something only you can determine. But I will tell you this. If we don't bury the bag properly today, if we wait for you to heal, the spirits inside will grow stronger. They are feeding on the residual connection to you, drawing power from the blood you shed and the fear you still carry. Every hour we delay makes them more dangerous. He finally turned to face her, his expression grave. I know you are in pain. I know you are exhausted. But pain and exhaustion can be endured. What the bag will become, if left unwatched, cannot. The words settled over her like a weight, pressing down on shoulders already burdened with more than they could bear. She wanted to argue, wanted to say that she had given enough, suffered enough that someone else should carry this burden now. But looking at Horyuki's weathered face, seeing the determination and the old sorrow that lived in his eyes, she understood that this was not just about her anymore. This was about preventing her suffering from spreading to others, about ensuring that the dark magic her desperation had unleashed didn't find another desperate soul to corrupt. She nodded slowly, setting down the half-finished bowl of stew. Then we go. Just, I'll need help getting to my feet. Horyuchi moved to her side, offering his arm for support. She gripped it with her ruined hands, biting back a whimper as fresh pain shot through her palms and let him pull her upright. The world spun for a moment, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision, but she breathed through it and waited for her equilibrium to return. Her legs felt like water, weak and unstable, but they held her weight, barely. She looked down at her feet, at the boots that were more holes than leather now, and wondered how many steps they had left in them before they disintegrated entirely. The journey began in silence, Horyuchi leading the way with his walking stick in one hand and his pack secured across his shoulders. The medicine bag, still wrapped in white cloth, was tied to the outside of his pack, where he could keep constant awareness of it without having to touch it directly. Lorraine followed several paces behind, her steps careful and measured, each one a small victory over the pain that screamed at her to stop, to lie down, to give up. The canyon floor was treacherous with loose rock and hidden holes, places where a careless step could turn an ankle or worse. She had to watch every footfall, which meant she couldn't watch the beauty unfolding around her as the sun climbed higher and transformed the canyon into a cathedral of light and shadow. They walked for what felt like hours, though the sun suggested it had been less than one. The canyon began to narrow, the walls pressing in from both sides until they were walking through a slot barely wide enough for Horyuchi's shoulders. The rock here was different. Smoother, carved by ancient water into flowing curves and spirals that seemed to suggest movement even in stillness. High above, the strip of sky visible between the canyon walls was a brilliant, painful blue, so bright it hurt to look at directly. The temperature dropped in the shade of the narrow passage, offering relief from the sun, but bringing with it a dampness that seemed to seep into Lorraine's bones. Horyuchi stopped suddenly, raising his hand in a gesture that clearly meant halt. Lorraine stumbled to a stop behind him, her breath coming in labored gasps, her legs trembling with the effort of keeping her upright. "What is it?" she managed to ask. "Why are we stopping? Someone followed us," Horyuchi said quietly, his eyes scanning the canyon walls above them. "Or something. I felt it for the last hour, a presence tracking our movements. It could be an animal, a mountain lion or bear drawn by the smell of blood from your wounds. Or it could be something else. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through Lorraine's exhaustion. Dutch Carver's men. Could they have tracked me this far?" Her mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. If Carver's trackers had found her trail, if they had followed her into the canyon, then everything Horyuchi had done to save her would be for nothing. They would take her back, and this time there would be no escape. This time, the punishment for running would be severe enough to serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider defying Dutch Carver's claim. Horyuchi's expression was unreadable. "I don't think it's human. The tracks I saw earlier, they were wrong. Too large, too oddly shaped. And there's a smell on the wind, something old and rotten that doesn't belong to any animal I know." He unslung his pack carefully, setting it down against the canyon wall, and pulled out a knife. A long blade that caught the light and threw it back in bright flashes. "Stay here. Don't move from this spot. And whatever you do, don't touch the bag." Before Lorraine could protest, before she could ask what he meant about tracks and smells and things that weren't human, Hodyuchi was moving back the way they had come, his steps silent despite the loose rock underfoot. He disappeared around a bend in the canyon, and suddenly Lorraine was alone. Alone with the pack. Alone with the medicine bag tied to its outside, so close she could reach out and touch it if she wanted to. The whispers started immediately. So soft at first that she thought she might be imagining them. But they grew louder, more insistent, forming words in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. "Take me back," the voices said. "You were stronger with me. You were safe. Without me, you are nothing. Without me, they will take you again, hurt you again, break you again. Take me back and be powerful. Take me back and be free." She pressed her hands over her ears, but it did nothing to block out the voices. They weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside her own head, echoing through the empty spaces the bag's removal had left behind. Her hands moved toward the pack, almost of their own volition, fingers reaching for the white cloth that separated her from the source of the whispers. Just one touch, just to feel that connection again, that sense of power and protection that had sustained her through days of hell. What harm could one touch do? A scream shattered the air, high and terrible and distinctly male. Hodyuchi's voice, raised in what might have been a war cry or a prayer or both. The sound broke through the spell that had been weaving itself around Lorraine's mind, snapping her back to awareness just as her fingers brushed the white cloth. She jerked her hand back as if burned, stumbling away from the pack, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. What had she almost done? What had she almost allowed herself to become again? More sounds came from around the bend, the clash of something hard against stone, a wet tearing noise that made Lorraine's stomach turn. Another cry from Hodyuchi, this one edged with pain. She wanted to run to him, to help somehow, but her legs wouldn't obey. Fear rooted her to the spot as effectively as iron chains. She could only stand there, pressed against the canyon wall, waiting for whatever was happening to resolve itself, one way or another. When Hodyuchi finally reappeared, he was limping, his left leg dragging slightly, and there was blood on his knife, black and thick like tar. More blood stained his shirt, though whether it was his own or from whatever he had fought, Lorraine couldn't tell. His face was grim, his jaw set in a hard line, and his eyes held a wildness she hadn't seen before, the look of a man who had just stared into something that challenged his understanding of the world. "We need to move," he said shortly. "Now, don't ask questions, just move." Lorraine didn't need to be told twice. She pushed away from the wall and followed as Hodyuchi grabbed his pack and started forward again, his pace faster now despite his injury, driven by an urgency that communicated itself without words. They moved through the narrow slot canyon at a speed that bordered on reckless, ignoring the loose rock and the uneven ground, focused only on putting distance between themselves and whatever Hodyuchi had encountered. Lorraine's lungs burned, her legs screamed in protest, but she kept moving, kept pushing forward, fueled by fear and the grim determination not to let Hodyuchi's sacrifice, whatever it had been, go to waste. The canyon began to open up again, the walls pulling back to reveal a wider space where red rock gave way to patches of scrubby vegetation and twisted juniper trees. A small spring bubbled up from between two boulders, creating a pool of clear water that reflected the sky like polished glass. The air here felt different, charged with something that made the hair on Lorraine's arms stand up. Her presence that was neither threatening nor welcoming, but simply was, ancient and patient and utterly indifferent to the struggles of mere humans. Hodyuchi stopped at the edge of the pool, his chest heaving, and set down his pack with a reverence that suggested they had reached their destination. "This is the place," he said, his voice rough. "Here the boundaries between worlds are thin. Here the spirits of protection are strong enough to contain what the bag holds. He knelt by the water, cupping his hands to drink deeply, then splashed water on his face and the wound on his leg. The water ran red, diluted blood swirling in the pool before being carried away by the current that fed the spring. "Help me gather stones. We need enough to build a cairn, a marker that will warn others not to dig here." Lorraine moved to obey, grateful for something concrete to do. Some action that would keep her mind occupied, and away from the whispers that still tried to worm their way back into her consciousness. The stones were everywhere, smooth river rock mixed with sharp-edged pieces of canyon wall. She gathered them one by one, using the front of her torn dress as a makeshift basket, ignoring the pain in her hands as the rough surfaces scraped against her wounds. Chi worked beside her, moving with purpose despite his injury, selecting stones of specific sizes and shapes according to some criteria Lorraine didn't understand. When they had gathered enough, Chi began to dig. The ground near the spring was soft, made pliable by the constant moisture, and his hands sank easily into the earth. He dug until the hole was as deep as his forearm, then deeper until it reached a layer of clay that gleamed almost white in the sunlight. He sat back on his heels, studying the hole, then nodded to himself. "This will do. The clay will hold it, seal it away from casual discovery." He looked at Lorraine, his expression serious. "What I do next, you must not interfere. No matter what you see or hear or feel, you must not touch the bag or try to stop me. Do you understand?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Part of her wanted to ask what he had fought in the canyon, what had left that black blood on his knife, but another part of her, the part that had learned hard lessons about curiosity and its costs, knew that some questions were better left unasked. Chi unwrapped the medicine bag slowly, exposing the dark leather to sunlight for the first time since he had taken it from Lorraine's hands. The moment the cloth fell away, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The whispers surged back with renewed force, no longer soft and seductive but loud and demanding, screaming at Lorraine to take it back, to stop this desecration, to kill the man who dared to bury their vessel. Chi began to sing, his voice low and rhythmic, words in his own language that flowed like water over stone. He pulled items from his pouch, sprinkling cornmeal around the hole, placing crystals at the 4 cardinal points, burning sage until the smoke hung thick in the air. His movements were precise, practiced, each gesture part of a ceremony that had been performed by his people for generations. The medicine bag writhed in his hands, not physically but spiritually, the shadows inside thrashing and fighting against what was being done to them. But Chi's voice never wavered, his song growing stronger, pulling power from the sacred ground beneath his feet and the spirits that dwelt in this thin place between worlds. He placed the bag in the hole, laying it gently on the white clay, then covered it with more cornmeal and crushed sage. His hands moved in complex patterns above the hole, tracing symbols in the air that seemed to glow faintly even in the bright daylight. The whispers reached a crescendo, becoming a shriek that existed only in Lorraine's mind but felt real enough to split her skull. She fell to her knees, hands pressed to her temples, tears streaming down her face as the bag's influence made one final desperate attempt to maintain its hold on her. Images flashed through her mind, memories that weren't hers, visions of violence and power and corruption that stretched back decades, showing her everyone who had ever touched the bag and what it had done to them. She saw Chi's uncle in his final days, his body consumed by black veins, his mind shattered by the spirits he had tried to control. She saw others before him, a line of desperate souls stretching back into history, all of them seeking power, all of them destroyed by what they found. Then, with a finality that felt like a door slamming shut, the connection severed completely. The whispers stopped. The images vanished. Lorraine found herself kneeling by the spring, gasping for air, her face wet with tears and her whole body shaking. Chi was covering the hole with earth, packing it down firmly, his song continuing in a lower register now, more prayer than command. When the hole was filled, he began to build the cairn, stacking the stones they had gathered in a precise pattern, creating a pillar that rose 3 feet from the ground. On the top stone, he used a piece of charcoal to draw a symbol, a warning in the old way that those who knew how to read such things would understand. When it was done, when the last stone was placed and the final prayer spoken, Ojuki sat back heavily, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. The wound on his leg had stopped bleeding, but his face was pale, drained of color, and his hands shook slightly as he wiped them on his pants. He looked at Lorraine, really looked at her for the first time since they had reached the sacred spring, and what she saw in his eyes was profound weariness mixed with something that might have been satisfaction. "It's done," he said simply. "The bag is sealed. The spirits are contained. As long as that cairn stands, they will remain bound." Lorraine couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, choked with emotions she couldn't name. Relief, certainly, but also grief for what she had lost, even if what she had lost was poisonous. The bag had been with her for days, had spoken to her, had made her feel powerful and protected and valued in a way nothing else ever had. Letting it go felt like losing a part of herself, even though she knew that part was corrupt and dangerous. She looked at the cairn, at the stones piled high over the buried evil, and wondered if she would ever truly be free of the whispers, or if some echo of them would live in her mind forever, a permanent reminder of her weakness and desperation. They rested by the sacred spring for an hour, neither speaking, both recovering from the ordeal of the burial. Ojuchi cleaned his leg wound properly, revealing a deep gash that ran from his knee to mid-thigh, the edges ragged as if something with claws had torn through flesh and muscle. He packed it with crushed herbs from his pouch, plants Lorraine didn't recognize, then bound it with strips of cloth torn from his shirt. His movements were methodical, showing no reaction to what must have been considerable pain, his face a mask of stoic endurance that spoke of a lifetime spent pushing through discomfort and injury. Lorraine watched him work, questions burning in her throat. But the silence between them felt sacred somehow, inviolable, as if speaking would break something fragile that the burial ceremony had created. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith and beat down on them with renewed intensity, Ojuchi stood and tested his weight on the injured leg. He grimaced slightly but nodded to himself, apparently satisfied that it would hold. "We should move," he said, his voice rough from the singing and the exertion. "This place is safe, protected, but we cannot stay here forever. There are settlements 2 days' walk to the east, trading posts where you can find work if you're willing. Places where Dutch carvers' reach doesn't extend." He looked at her directly, his dark eyes searching her face. "Or you can come further with me. I have a winter camp in the high country, a place where my people gather when the seasons change. You would be welcome there until you decide what path you wish to walk." Lorraine pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them despite the pain in her hands. The torn dress barely covered her anymore, reduced to little more than rags held together by stubborn threads and dried blood. She knew she must look like something that had crawled from a grave, wild-haired and hollow-eyed, marked by violence and dark magic. What kind of welcome could someone like her expect anywhere? "Why do you keep helping me?" The question came out smaller than she intended, almost childlike in its vulnerability. "You've risked your life twice now, fought something I didn't even see, spent your medicine and your strength on a stranger who brought nothing but trouble into your path. I don't understand what you gain from this." Ojuchi was quiet for a long moment, staring at the cairn that marked the medicine bag's grave. When he spoke, his words came slowly, each one weighted with old pain and older wisdom. "When my sister was taken, I was 16 winters old. I thought I was a man, thought I was strong enough to protect my family. But I wasn't. I failed her, and that failure has lived in my chest like a stone ever since." He touched the center of his chest with one hand, as if indicating the exact location of that burden. "After I found her in the raiders' camp, after I saw what they had done to her mind and spirit, I swore an oath to the spirits. I swore that I would never again turn away from someone in need, never again choose my own safety over another's suffering. Because choosing safety, choosing to protect myself instead of her, that's how I lost her in the first place. His eyes finally moved from the cairn to Lorraine's face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. So I don't help you for gain. I help you because I swore I would help anyone who needed it. Because maybe if enough people make that choice, eventually there will be someone there when the next young girl is dragged from her home in the night. The words hit Lorraine like physical blows, each one striking someplace deep inside where she had locked away her own guilt and shame. She had spent days thinking only of her own survival, her own fear, her own desperate need for safety and power. But Hodyu Chi's sister, and how many others like her, women and girls and boys taken and broken and lost, how many of them had needed someone to make that choice and found no one there? "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry that happened to your sister. I'm sorry you carry that weight." Hodyu Chi shook his head slightly. "Don't apologize for things that are not your doing. Save your sorrow for the things you can change, the choices you will make from this day forward. You have been given a second chance at life, bought with pain and blood, but a chance nonetheless. What you do with it, that will determine whether your suffering had meaning or was simply waste." They left the sacred spring as the afternoon heat began to build toward its peak, following a different path than the one that had brought them there. Hodyu Chi explained that they couldn't risk returning through the narrow slot canyon, not with whatever he had fought potentially still lurking there. Instead, they would climb the canyon wall, a treacherous ascent that would take them to the mesa top and allow them to travel across more open ground. Lorraine looked at the wall he indicated, at the sheer red rock face that seemed to rise straight up toward the cloudless sky, and felt her courage falter. In her current condition, weakened and injured, the climb looked impossible, but Hodyu Chi was already moving, finding handholds in cracks she couldn't see, his body flowing up the rock face with a grace that belied his injury. He paused about 15 feet up, looking back down at her. "The first steps are always the hardest," he called down. "After that, your body remembers what it's capable of. Trust your hands, trust your feet, and don't look down until you're at the top." Lorraine approached the wall, her heart hammering. Up close, she could see the network of cracks and ledges that Hodyu Chi was using, a path invisible from a distance, but clear once you knew where to look. She reached up, fitting her torn hands into a crack, and pulled. Pain screamed through her palms, but the stone held her weight. She found a foothold, pushed up, reached for the next handhold. One move at a time, one small victory over gravity and fear. Don't think about how high you're getting. Don't think about falling. Just reach, grip, pull, step. Reach, grip, pull, step. The rhythm became meditative, a physical prayer that pushed everything else from her mind. Halfway up, her left hand slipped, torn flesh unable to maintain its grip on the smooth stone. She swung out, held only by her right hand, and the toes of her boots wedged into a narrow crack, and for one heart-stopping moment she was certain she would fall. But Hodyu Chi was there, moving down toward her with impossible speed, his hand closing around her wrist before she could lose her remaining hold. "I have you," he said, his voice calm despite the precarious position. "Find your footing again." "I won't let you fall," she believed him. For reasons she couldn't articulate, she trusted this stranger completely. More than she had ever trusted anyone, including the husband who had sold her and the parents who had given her to that husband without asking what she wanted. She found the foothold again, got both hands back on the rock, and continued climbing. Hodyu Chi stayed close now, positioned slightly above and to the side where he could reach her if she faltered again. The sun beat down on them mercilessly, turning the rock into a griddle that burned through the thin soles of her boots. But she kept moving, kept climbing, driven by a determination she hadn't known she possessed. When she finally pulled herself over the lip of the canyon and collapsed on the mesa top, gasping and shaking, she felt something shift inside her. She had done it. Despite the pain, despite the exhaustion, despite every logical reason why she should have failed, she had climbed out of the canyon. It was a small thing, perhaps, meaningless in the grand scheme of a life, but it felt significant. It felt like proof that she wasn't as broken as she had believed. Hodyuchi sat beside her, breathing hard himself, his leg wound, seeping fresh blood through the bandage. For several minutes, they simply sat there, two damaged people on top of a mesa, staring out at the vast emptiness of the New Mexico territory stretching in all directions. The view from here was staggering, miles and miles of red rock and sage desert, broken by distant mountains that looked blue in the afternoon haze. Lorraine had never seen so much empty space, had never understood how small a single human life was in the face of such immensity. It should have been terrifying, that smallness, but instead she found it oddly comforting. Her problems, her pain, her past, all of it was so tiny compared to the eternal landscape. Maybe that meant it was possible to leave it behind, to walk far enough that it couldn't follow. "We'll camp here tonight," Hodyuchi said, breaking the silence. "There's no water on the mesa top, but I have enough in my skin to share, and we both need rest before attempting the walk to the settlements. Your hands need proper treatment, and my leg won't carry me much further without healing time." He began to unpack his supplies, pulling out dried meat and a small pouch of ground corn. "Tomorrow, when the sun rises, we'll decide the next steps. But for now, rest." As evening approached and the brutal heat began to fade, Hodyuchi built a small fire using dried juniper wood he found scattered across the mesa top. The smoke rose straight up in the still air, a thin grey column reaching toward the darkening sky. Lorraine sat wrapped in the blanket he'd given her, watching the flames dance and feeling the warmth seep into her bones. Her hands throbbed with a deep, persistent ache that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. But the black veins had faded further, now barely visible against her skin. The corruption was leaving her system, slowly but surely being pushed out by whatever natural healing her body could muster. "Tell me about your sister," Lorraine said suddenly, surprising herself with the request. "What was she like? Before they took her, I mean." Hodyuchi's hands paused in their work of preparing the evening meal. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer, that she had overstepped some boundary. But then he spoke, his voice soft with memory. Died was laughing, always laughing. Even when times were hard, when food was scarce and the winters were brutal, she found joy. She had a gift with animals, could gentle the wildest horse with nothing but patience and soft words. And she sang, her voice was like water flowing over stones, pure and clear. A faint smile touched his lips, there and gone, like a ghost. She wanted to be a healer like our grandfather. She would follow him everywhere, pestering him with questions, begging to learn the songs and ceremonies. He pretended to be annoyed, but you could see the pride in his eyes whenever she mastered a new skill. "How old would she be now?" Lorraine asked quietly. 26 winters. "If she still lives." The uncertainty in those last words carried more weight than any definitive statement of death could have. Not knowing was its own special torture, Lorraine realized, a wound that could never fully heal because it could never be properly acknowledged. "I search for her still when I travel. I look at the faces of women in every settlement and trading post, hoping to see some recognition, some spark of memory. But after 12 years, I don't know if I would even recognize her anymore. People change. Suffering changes them most of all." They ate in silence after that, sharing the simple meal of dried meat and corn paste that Hodyuchi had prepared. The stars began to emerge overhead, more stars than Lorraine had ever seen in her life, so many they seemed to blur together into rivers of light flowing across the black sky. She had grown up in towns where lanterns and hearth fires dimmed the night sky, where you could count the visible stars on 2 hands. But out here, in the absolute darkness of the mesa top, the full glory of the heavens revealed itself. It was overwhelming and beautiful, and made her feel both infinitely small and somehow connected to something vast and eternal. "Hodyuchi," she said, testing the name carefully. She'd been thinking of him as simply the Navajo or the medicine man in her mind, keeping that distance between them. But he had earned the right to be a person to her, someone with a name and a history and a pain as real as her own. "What does your name mean?" "Storyteller," he answered. "My grandfather gave it to me when I was young, said I had a gift for remembering the old tales and telling them in ways that made people listen. I don't know if he was right, but the name stuck." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "Names are important in my culture. They're not just labels, but declarations of who you are meant to be, what role you will fill in the great pattern of existence." "Lorraine doesn't mean anything," she said quietly. "At least nothing I know of. My mother chose it because it sounded refined, like the name of a rich woman. She had ambitions for me, wanted me to marry well, to climb higher than where we started." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I suppose I fulfilled that wish in a way. I married a man who owned property, who had prospects. And look where it led. Where it led was here," Odyushi said firmly, "sitting by a fire under clean stars, still breathing, still choosing. That's not nothing. That's not failure." His words wrapped around something tender inside her, a place that had been bruised so badly she thought it might never heal. Maybe he was right. Maybe survival itself was a kind of victory, especially when the alternative had seemed so certain. She had been sold, had run, had found cursed magic that nearly destroyed her, and yet here she sat, alive and increasingly aware that life might still hold possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. It wasn't the life she had dreamed of as a girl, wasn't the fairy tale ending she had been promised. But it was real and it was hers, and maybe that was enough. The night deepened, and the temperature dropped further. Lorraine lay down near the fire, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion that had been building for days. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless for the first time since she had picked up the medicine bag. No whispers haunted her rest. No shadows pulled at her consciousness. Whatever connection the bag had forged with her spirit had been truly severed by the burial ceremony, leaving behind only the physical wounds that would heal with time and care. Odyushi kept watch through the night, as he had the night before, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. The thing he had fought in the canyon troubled him deeply, though he hadn't shared the full details with Lorraine. It had been a skinwalker, a dark practitioner, who had traded his humanity for the ability to wear animal forms. The creature had been drawn by the medicine bag's power, pulled to it like a moth to flame, seeking to claim that dark magic for itself. The fight had been brutal and close, and Odyushi knew he had been lucky to survive it. Skinwalkers were dangerous at the best of times, but one drawn by blood magic was doubly so, driven by an insatiable hunger that made them reckless and strong, beyond natural limits. He glanced at the sleeping woman by the fire, at her torn dress and bandaged hands, and the face that looked younger in sleep, less haunted. She had been through more than most people endured in a lifetime, had touched darkness that would have destroyed weaker souls, and yet something in her remained unbroken. Not whole, perhaps, not undamaged, but not destroyed either. There was strength in her, buried deep beneath the fear and trauma, the kind of strength that came from surviving when survival seemed impossible. Given time and safety and the chance to heal, he suspected she would surprise herself with what she was capable of becoming. As the moon rose high overhead, casting silver light across the mesa, Odyushi allowed himself a moment of hope. Hope that Lorraine would find her way to a new life, that the darkness behind her would fade into memory rather than consuming her future. Hope that his sister, wherever she was, had found someone to show her similar kindness, to help her remember that she was more than what had been done to her. Hope that the medicine bag would remain buried, its evil contained, until time and earth reclaimed it completely. They were small hopes, fragile as new grass after a long drought, but they were enough to carry him through the dark hours until dawn. Morning came with a wind that swept across the mesa top, carrying with it the scent of distant rain and sage crushed underfoot by some passing animal. Lorraine woke slowly, her body protesting every movement, muscles stiff from the climb and the days of running that had preceded it. But something was different. The fog that had filled her mind since touching the medicine bag, that constant background whisper of dark promises and corrupted power, was gone completely. The silence in her head was almost startling, like stepping from a crowded room into sudden solitude. She sat up carefully, flexing her hands and wincing at the pain that lanced through her torn palms. But even the pain felt cleaner somehow, honest in a way the bag's influence had never been. Odyuhi was already awake, sitting cross-legged at the edge of the mesa, looking out at the sunrise, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and gold. His injured leg was stretched out before him, and she could see fresh blood seeping through the bandage, a dark stain that had spread during the night. He turned when he heard her moving, his weathered face showing the lines of exhaustion and pain he had been concealing. But his eyes were clear and focused. "We need to talk about what comes next," he said, without preamble. "My leg is worse than I let on yesterday. The climb did damage that rest alone won't fix. I need proper treatment, herbs I don't carry, and time to heal that we don't have if we're to reach the settlements before my supplies run out." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There's a trading post half a day's walk from here, run by a man named Samuel Redding. He's fair, as white men go, and he owes me a debt from years back. He'll give you work if you're willing to earn your keep, and he won't ask questions about where you came from or why." Lorraine felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You're leaving. You're going to leave me there and go back to your people." It wasn't a question, and she tried to keep the panic from her voice, but some of it leaked through anyway. The thought of being alone again, even in a safe place, terrified her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "I'm not abandoning you," Hodyuchi said firmly, "but I need to return to my winter camp, to the healers who can treat this wound properly before infection sets in deep. And you need to learn how to stand on your own feet without dark magic or a protector standing between you and the world." The trading post is a good place to start. Redding's wife, Martha, she's got a kind heart and a practical head. She'll teach you the skills you need, give you work that builds strength in more than just your body. He met her eyes directly. "I'll come back. When the spring comes and the snows melt from the high country, I'll return to check on you. But you need these months to discover who you are, without fear driving every choice." The logic was sound. Even if the emotion behind her resistance wasn't, Lorraine knew he was right, knew that she couldn't follow him indefinitely, couldn't remain a rescued thing, forever dependent on someone else's strength. But the knowing didn't make the fear any less real. What if Dutch Carver's men find me? What if my husband comes looking? Her voice was small, the voice of the frightened woman who had clutched the medicine bag like a lifeline. Hodyuchi reached into his pack and pulled out a small knife. Nothing fancy but sharp and well-balanced. He held it out to her. "Then you use this, not because violence is the answer to everything, but because knowing you can protect yourself, truly protect yourself, without relying on corrupted magic, that knowledge changes how you move through the world. You stop being prey when you remember you have teeth." He waited until she took the knife, her fingers closing around the worn leather handle. Samuel Redding's trading post sits on the boundary between territories. It's neutral ground, a place where even men running from the law can stop for supplies without fear of arrest. Your husband would be a fool to start trouble there, and Dutch Carver's reach doesn't extend that far west. You won't be safe from everything, nowhere in this territory offers that, but you'll be safer than most places. They broke camp slowly, Lorraine helping Hodyuchi pack his supplies with her bandaged hands, both of them moving with the careful deliberation of people who had pushed their bodies to the limit and beyond. The walk across the mesa top was easier than the canyon floor had been, the ground relatively flat and covered in short grass that had gone golden in the autumn sun. But Hodyuchi's limp grew more pronounced with each mile. His jaw tight with pain he refused to acknowledge, and Lorraine found herself supporting some of his weight by the time the trading post came into view. Did-il-dat-to-know? It was a squat adobe structure built into the side of a low hill, surrounded by a split-rail corral that held a half-dozen horses and a few head of cattle. Smoke rose from a chimney, and Lorraine could hear the sound of a hammer striking metal, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith at work. As they approached, a large man emerged from the building, his beard streaked with grey and his belly straining against a leather apron. He squinted at them in the bright sunlight, his hand dropping instinctively to the pistol at his hip, but then recognition dawned on his broad face. "Hodyu-he?"
That you?
His voice was rough but carried genuine warmth. "Thought you'd be in the high country by now. What brings you down to—" He stopped, taking in Hodyu-chi's injured leg and Lorraine's battered appearance. "Hell's bells, man, what happened to you?" "Long story, Samuel. Too long to tell, standing in your yard." Hodyu-chi's voice was strained, and Lorraine realized with a start that he was leaning more heavily on her than she had thought, using her small frame to keep himself upright. "I need Martha's help, and this woman needs work and a safe place to start over. You still owe me for that business with the horse thieves 3 winters back." Samuel Redding's expression shifted from concern to understanding. That I do, Martha." He turned toward the building, bellowing loud enough to make Lorraine flinch. "Martha, get out here. We got company and one of them's bleeding." A woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She took one look at the scene in her yard and immediately shifted into motion, barking orders at Samuel to help get Hodyu-chi inside, gesturing for Lorraine to follow, moving with the efficient authority of someone who had dealt with injuries and emergencies more times than she cared to count. The interior of the trading post was dim and cool, a blessed relief from the sun. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with supplies ranging from ammunition to canned goods to bolts of cloth. Martha led them through to the back, to living quarters that were surprisingly spacious and well-furnished. She directed Samuel to lay Hodyu-chi on a wide bed, then shooed both him and Lorraine out while she examined the leg wound. Lorraine found herself standing in the main room of the trading post, suddenly awkward and unsure, her torn dress and wild appearance drawing curious glances from 2 rough-looking men who were browsing the ammunition selection. Samuel noticed her discomfort and stepped between her and the strangers, his bulk blocking their view. "Those hands need treatment too," he said, his voice gentler than she would have expected from a man his size. "Once Martha's done with the medicine man, she'll fix you up proper. In the meantime, come help me in the stockroom. Got inventory needs counting, and it'll give you something to do besides worry." He didn't wait for her agreement, just started walking toward a door at the back of the shop, clearly expecting her to follow. The work was mindless but absorbing, counting crates of goods and calling out numbers for Samuel to record in a battered ledger. Lorraine's torn hands made the task difficult, but she pushed through the pain, grateful for the distraction, for something concrete and real to focus on. Samuel didn't pry, didn't ask questions about her appearance or how she came to be traveling with Hodyu-chi. He simply treated her like any other worker, correcting her when she miscounted, grunting approval when she got it right. It was the most normal she had felt in weeks. Martha found them an hour later, her sleeves rolled up and traces of blood on her apron. "The leg's bad," she said bluntly, looking at Samuel. "Deep infection setting in. I've cleaned it best I can and packed it with poultices, but he needs rest, real rest, not the kind you get sleeping on canyon floors. He'll stay here at least a week, maybe 2. She turned her sharp gaze on Lorraine. "Now let me see those hands, girl. And while I'm working, you can tell me your story. I won't repeat it and I won't judge it. But I need to know what kind of trouble might follow you to my door." Lorraine hesitated, glancing at Samuel. But the big man just nodded and left them alone, returning to the front of the shop. Martha led her to a small kitchen and gestured for her to sit at a rough wooden table. As the older woman unwrapped the makeshift bandages and began cleaning the wounds with water and sharp-smelling antiseptic, Lorraine told her story. Not all of it. She couldn't bring herself to speak of the medicine bag and what it had whispered to her. But she told about her husband's betrayal, about Dutch Carver, about running into the desert and being found by Hodyushi. Martha listened without interrupting, her weathered hands gentle despite their strength, her expression revealing nothing of what she thought. When Lorraine finished, Martha sat back and studied her for a long moment. "You're not the first woman to come through here running from a man who thought he owned her," she said finally. "And you won't be the last. This trading post, it sits on the edge of everything, the edge of territories and jurisdictions and civilized law. We get all kinds passing through, some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. I won't lie to you and say you're completely safe here. Nowhere is completely safe for a woman alone. But Samuel and I, we don't hold with men who treat women like property. Anyone comes looking for you, anyone tries to take you against your will, they'll find it's not as easy as they think." She began wrapping Lorraine's hands in clean bandages, her movements practiced and sure. "Hodyushi says you need work. I can offer you that. Cooking, cleaning, helping in the shop when we're busy. The pay won't be much, but you'll have a room and meals and safety. What you do with that, whether you stay or move on when you're healed, that's your choice to make." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was almost peaceful. Lorraine woke each morning before dawn, helping Martha prepare breakfast for the household and any travelers who had stopped for the night. She learned to bake bread in the outdoor oven, to salt meat for preservation, to mend clothing with stitches that would hold against hard use. Her hands healed slowly, the torn flesh knitting back together under Martha's careful treatment, the black veins fading until they were barely visible shadows under her skin. She gained weight, her hollow cheeks filling out, the sharp angles of near starvation softening into healthier curves. She let Martha cut her hair, the tangled mass that had been ruined by sun and wind and days of running, cutting it short enough to be practical, and she wore clothes that Martha gave her, simple dresses and sturdy boots that fit properly. Hodyushi remained in bed for the first week, his body fighting the infection that had taken root in his leg. Lorraine visited him daily, bringing food and water, sitting beside the bed to talk or simply keep him company in silence. They didn't speak of the medicine bag or what had happened in the canyon. That chapter felt closed, sealed away like the evil they had buried beneath stone and prayer. Instead, they talked of smaller things, stories from his childhood, questions she had about his people and their ways, plans for the spring when he would return to check on her progress. On the 8th day, Hodyushi managed to stand, his legs still stiff and painful, but no longer threatening to kill him. He walked the length of the room and back, testing his strength, then nodded with satisfaction. "Another few days and I can travel," he told Lorraine. "The infection has broken. Martha's medicines did their work." There was relief in his voice, but also something else, a reluctance that Lorraine recognized because she felt it herself. Their time together was ending, and while both knew it was necessary, knowing didn't make the parting any easier. 3 days later, in the early morning before the trading post came fully alive, Hodyushi prepared to leave. His pack was replenished with supplies Samuel had insisted he take, payment for the debt the trader owed, and refusal to hear any argument about it. Lorraine stood in the yard, her arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill, watching as he checked the straps and tested the weight. Part of her wanted to beg him to stay, or to ask if she could go with him, but she knew those were the old fears talking, the voice of the woman who had needed rescuing. The new woman, the one she was slowly becoming, understood that this was necessary. Hodyushi turned to face her, his expression serious. "You'll do well here," he said. "Martha and Samuel, they're good people. Let them teach you. Let yourself learn. And when spring comes, when I return, I expect to find you standing even taller than you are now." He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather cord strung with turquoise beads. "This belonged to my sister. I've carried it since she was taken, hoping to return it to her someday. But I think she would want you to have it, another woman who survived when survival seemed impossible." He held it out, and after a moment's hesitation, Lorraine took it, the beads smooth and warm from being carried close to his heart. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life, not just from the bag, but from everything, from despair and darkness and the belief that I was worthless. How do you thank someone for that?" "By living," Hodiuchi said simply. "I should tout send to you. By choosing every day to keep moving forward, to build something good from the wreckage. That's all the thanks I need." He touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of farewell and blessing, then turned and walked away. His stride still slightly uneven, but strong enough to carry him back to his people and the winter camp that waited in the high country. Lorraine watched until he disappeared over a rise, the morning sun at his back, turning his figure into a dark silhouette against the golden light. Then she turned back to the trading post, to the life that waited there, uncertain and challenging but hers to shape. Martha was in the doorway, a knowing look on her weathered face. "Come on, girl," she called. "Those dishes won't wash themselves, and we've got travelers coming in for breakfast." It was ordinary, mundane, exactly what Lorraine needed. The weeks turned into months, and winter came to the New Mexico territory, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that transformed the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. Lorraine settled into her role at the trading post, becoming indispensable to Martha and Samuel, learning skills she had never imagined needing. She learned to shoot, Samuel teaching her with patience and precision until she could hit a target at 50 paces. She learned to bargain with traders, to spot a man lying about the quality of his goods, to stand firm when someone tried to cheat or intimidate. She learned that she was stronger than she had believed, that the woman who had run into the desert was not the same woman who looked back at her from Martha's small mirror. There were hard days, days when the memories came back with crushing force, when she would wake from nightmares about her husband's betrayal, or the feel of the medicine bag pulsing against her palms. On those days, Martha would find extra work for her hands, knowing that keeping busy was sometimes the only remedy for dark thoughts. And there were men who came through the trading post, rough characters who looked at her with speculation in their eyes, wondering if she might be available for purposes other than serving food. But Samuel had made it clear from the start that Lorraine was under his protection, and Samuel Redding was not a man to be trifled with. One morning in early spring, when the snow had melted and the first green shoots were appearing on the sage bushes, Lorraine woke to find Martha standing at her door with an odd expression on her face. "You've got a visitor," Martha said. "Been waiting in the yard since before sunup." Lorraine's heart jumped, hope and fear mixing in equal measure. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Hodiuchi standing by the corral, looking thinner than when he had left, but healthy, his leg apparently fully healed. He turned when he heard her approach, and a rare smile crossed his face. "You look different," he said, his dark eyes taking in the changes the winter had wrought. Stronger, like someone who has found solid ground beneath her feet. It was true. Lorraine could feel the difference herself. The way she stood straighter, the way her voice came out steady and sure instead of trembling with uncertainty. "I told you I would return," Hodiuchi continued. "I promised to check on your progress, but I see now that you don't need checking on. You've done the work yourself." They walked together along the boundary of the trading post property, talking of the winter that had passed and the changes it had brought to both of them. Hodiuchi told her that his sister had been found, not alive but her remains, allowing the family to finally perform the proper burial ceremonies and let her spirit rest. The news brought tears to Lorraine's eyes, grief for the sister she had never known, but whose memory had shaped so much of her own rescue. Hodiuchi's face was peaceful as he spoke of it, the old wound finally able to heal now that closure had been granted. "What will you do now?" he asked her as they stood looking out at the vast landscape that had once seemed so threatening, but now felt almost like home. "Will you stay here, or do you have other plans?" Lorraine was quiet for a moment, considering. The trading post had been a sanctuary, a place to heal and grow, but she could feel something stirring inside her, a restlessness that suggested her journey wasn't quite finished. "I think I'll stay through the summer," she said slowly. Martha wants to teach me bookkeeping, and Samuel says he might let me manage the shop when they take their trip to Santa Fe in the fall. But after that, I don't know. Maybe I'll move on, find a town where I can start completely fresh. Or maybe I'll stay here and help build this place into something even bigger. I have choices now, real choices, and that still feels like a miracle. Hodiuchi nodded, understanding in his eyes. Choices are what make us human, he said. Not the big ones, those come rarely, but the small daily choices to be kind or cruel, brave or cowardly, to heal or to harm. You've been making the right choices, and it shows. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. I brought you something, a gift to mark your transformation. Lorraine unwrapped it carefully to find a necklace made of silver and turquoise, the craftsmanship exquisite, the stones catching the morning light and throwing it back in shades of blue and green. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's protection, Hodiuchi corrected gently. Not the kind that corrupts, not dark magic or violence, but the protection that comes from beauty and tradition and the blessings of my people. Wear it, and remember that you are stronger than any darkness that might try to claim you. He helped her fasten it around her neck, and Lorraine felt the weight of it settle against her collarbone. Solid and real and good, they parted ways again as the sun climbed higher. Hodiuchi returning to his people, and Lorraine returning to the trading post and the life she was building there. But this time, the parting felt different, not an ending but a chapter closing in a story that would continue. She stood in the yard long after he had disappeared, one hand touching the necklace at her throat, the other resting on the knife at her belt, symbols of the two kinds of strength she had learned she possessed, the strength to create beauty, and the strength to defend it when necessary. Martha called from the doorway. Something about breakfast burning if Lorraine didn't get inside and help. And Lorraine turned away from the horizon with a smile on her face. The desert wind swept across the trading post, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lorraine Weston felt something that had been absent from her life for so long she had almost forgotten its name. She felt hope, genuine and untainted, hope for a future she would build with her own hands, a future where she would never again be anyone's property or victim, where the only voice she had to listen to was her own. 5 years had passed since that spring morning when Hodiuchi had returned to find Lorraine transformed, and the New Mexico territory had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The railroad had pushed further west, bringing with it settlers and merchants and the slow creep of what people called civilization, though the old-timers argued that civilization was just another word for forgetting how to survive on your own terms. The trading post had grown along with the territory, expanding from a single building into a small compound with a proper store, a boarding house, and even a small stable where travelers could rest their horses and themselves before continuing their journeys. Lorraine stood on the porch of what was now called Reading and Weston General Store, her name painted on the sign alongside Samuel's, a partnership that had been formalized 2 years earlier when the old trader had decided he was getting too old to manage everything himself. She had bought into the business with money she had saved carefully, coin by coin, building her stake through hard work and smart trading. Martha had taught her well, not just the practical skills of running a business, but the deeper wisdom of reading people, of knowing when to extend credit and when to demand payment, of building relationships that would last beyond a single transaction. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and Lorraine took a moment to simply breathe it in, this life she had built from the wreckage of her past. She was 30 now, her face showing the lines of experience but also the softness that came from laughter and contentment. Her hands, once torn and corrupted by dark magic, were now calloused from honest work, strong and capable. The scars remained, faint white lines across her palms that she sometimes traced when she was thinking, reminders of how far she had come and how close she had been to losing everything. A rider appeared on the eastern road, dust trailing behind him in the still morning air. Lorraine shaded her eyes against the sun, trying to make out who it might be. As the figure drew closer, recognition sparked, and a smile spread across her face. Hodyuchi, sitting tall on a paint horse that must have cost him dearly, his long hair now streaked with more grey than black, but his bearing still strong and proud. He had visited twice each year since that first spring, a ritual they had both come to depend on. These check-ins that had evolved from rescuer and rescued into something more like family. He dismounted with the ease of a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot, and approached the porch with a slight limp that only showed when he was tired. The leg wound had healed, but left its mark, a permanent reminder of the price he had paid to save a stranger in the desert. "Lorraine Weston," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine affection. "Or should I say Lorraine Redding now? I heard rumors in Santa Fe that you and Samuel had made things official." Lorraine laughed, a sound that came easily these days, unshadowed by fear or bitterness. "The rumors are half right. Samuel and Martha asked me to take their name. Said it would make the inheritance easier when they pass. God willing, that's many years from now. But I kept Weston too, hyphenated it proper. Lorraine Weston Redding. It's a mouthful, but it honors both the woman I was and the woman I became." She gestured to the rocking chair beside her. "Sit. Tell me what brings you down from the high country in the middle of summer. Usually you don't visit until the autumn." Hodyuchi settled into the chair with a grateful sigh, accepting the cup of water she poured from a pitcher kept cool in the shade. "I came to tell you something," he said after a long drink. "Something I thought you should hear from me rather than from rumors or newspaper reports." His expression grew serious, and Lorraine felt a flutter of old anxiety in her chest, a ghost of the fear that used to dominate her existence. "Dutch Carver is dead. Shot 3 weeks ago in a dispute over a card game in Albuquerque. And your husband, Curtis Weston, he drank himself to death last winter. Froze in an alley behind a saloon, too drunk to find his way home. The news should have brought triumph, some sense of vindication or justice served. But what Lorraine felt instead was a distant sort of sadness, not for the men themselves, but for the waste of it all. 2 lives consumed by their own darkness, leaving nothing behind but cautionary tales and relieved widows. "I stopped being afraid of them a long time ago," she said quietly. "Stopped giving them space in my head. But thank you for telling me. It's good to know that chapter is truly closed." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the trading post come alive as the day progressed. A family arrived in a covered wagon, their children spilling out like puppies, excited and loud. A pair of prospectors led pack mules loaded with supplies toward the mountains, chasing rumors of silver strikes. A Navajo woman Lorraine recognized from previous visits approached the porch. Baskets of woven goods balanced on her hip, and Lorraine greeted her in halting but serviceable Navajo, a language Hodyuchi had been teaching her over the years. The woman's face lit up at the effort, and they negotiated a fair price for the baskets while Hodyuchi watched with approval. After the transaction, after the woman had gone inside to browse the store's offerings, Hodyuchi spoke again. "You've done well here. Better than well. You've built something real, something that serves the community and brings people together. This is medicine too, different from the ceremonies and prayers, but healing nonetheless. You create a space where people can trade fairly, where they can rest and resupply, where different peoples can meet without fear. That's powerful work." Lorraine felt heat rise to her cheeks, unused to such direct praise even after all these years. "I just do what needs doing. Martha and Samuel taught me that the best way to build a life is to make yourself useful, to find ways to serve that don't diminish you. This place, it's become more than a business to me. It's proof that I'm more than what was done to me, that I can create instead of just survive." "Speaking of creating," Hodyuchi said with a slight smile, "I heard another rumor in Santa Fe, something about a school teacher from back east who's been spending a lot of time at this trading post, helping you with your reading and writing, The rumors say he's quite taken with the formidable Lorraine Weston Redding. Now Lorraine did blush fully, unable to stop the smile that tugged at her lips. James Harrison. He came through last year on his way to a teaching position in Silver City, but his wagon broke an axle and he had to stay for repairs. We got to talking, and well, he never quite made it to Silver City. He's teaching the children of settlers and miners in a schoolhouse we built on the north edge of the property. She twisted the silver and turquoise necklace Hoduchi had given her years ago, a habit when she was nervous or excited. He's asked me to marry him 3 times now. I keep saying I need to think about it, but you've already decided yes, Hoduchi said with certainty. You're just afraid. Afraid that opening your heart again will lead to the same pain as before. Lorraine met his knowing gaze and sighed. Is it that obvious? Martha says the same thing, tells me I'm being foolish, that James is nothing like Curtis, that I deserve happiness and companionship. And I know she's right, I do. But there's still this voice in my head sometimes, whispering that I'm not meant for such things, that I used up all my luck just surviving. Hoduchi leaned forward, his expression intent. That voice is the last echo of the medicine bag, the final thread of corruption that wants to keep you isolated and afraid. Don't give it power. You've earned your happiness through blood and pain and years of hard work. Take it. Marry your school teacher. Build a family if that's what you want. Live fully, not halfway, not holding back part of yourself in case the darkness returns. The darkness only wins if you let fear make your choices. The words hit deep, striking at the core of what had been holding Lorraine back from fully embracing the future that waited for her. She'd been so focused on building safety and independence that she had forgotten that true living required risk, required vulnerability, required trusting that the foundation she had built was strong enough to support the weight of love and all its potential for both joy and pain. You're right, she said softly. You're absolutely right. I'll tell him yes. Tonight, I'll tell him yes. They talked through the morning and into the afternoon, catching up on the years and the changes, sharing stories of the people whose lives had intersected with theirs. Hoduchi spoke of his people's struggles as the territory grew more crowded, of the pressure to give up the old ways and adopt the customs of the settlers who kept arriving in ever greater numbers. Lorraine spoke of her plans to expand the trading post further, perhaps even to open a second location, and of her hope that James's school would grow into something permanent, a real institution that would give the children of the territory access to education, regardless of their background. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Hoduchi prepared to leave. But before he mounted his horse, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. One more thing, he said, handing it to Lorraine. Open it. She unwrapped the bundle carefully to find a book, old and worn but lovingly preserved, its pages filled with handwritten text in both English and Navajo. It's a collection of stories, Hoduchi explained. Healing stories, teaching stories, stories about transformation and survival and the strength it takes to choose light when darkness offers easier paths. I've been writing them down for years, trying to preserve them before they're lost. This copy is for you and for the children who will come through James's school. Teach them these stories. Let them know that healing is possible, that survival isn't just about living, but about choosing how to live. Lorraine clutched the book to her chest, tears stinging her eyes. It was more than a gift. It was a passing of wisdom, a recognition that she had become someone worthy of carrying these stories forward, of being a keeper of healing rather than just a recipient of it. I'll treasure this, she managed to say, and I'll make sure the stories are shared, that they live on. Hoduchi smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost young. I know you will. That's why I'm giving it to you. He swung up onto his horse, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. I'll return in the autumn as usual. Perhaps by then you'll have more news to share. Perhaps a wedding I should attend. Perhaps, Lorraine said with a smile of her own. Safe travels, my friend. May the spirits watch over you. She watched him ride away, his figure gradually disappearing into the gathering dusk, and felt the familiar bitter sweetness of these partings, tempered by the certainty that he would return, that their connection was too strong to be broken by mere distance or time. Turning back to the trading post, she saw James emerging from the schoolhouse, papers tucked under his arm, his glasses slightly askew as they always were by the end of the day. He saw her and smiled, that open, genuine smile that had first captured her attention and held it through all her hesitations and fears. Lorraine walked to meet him, the book of stories still clutched in her hands, the silver necklace warm against her skin and the knife still at her belt because some lessons were too important to forget. She had survived darkness, had been offered corrupt power and chosen to let it go, had built a life from nothing through determination and the help of good people who chose to see her worth. And now, standing at the threshold of another transformation, another choice to be made, she felt ready. "James," she said, reaching him, her voice steady and sure. "I have something to tell you." The answer is yes. It's been yes for a while now, I was just too afraid to say it. But I'm done letting fear make my choices. So yes, I'll marry you if the offer still stands. His face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds, and he swept her into his arms, papers scattering forgotten to the ground, and kissed her with a joy so pure it made her laugh against his lips. Around them, the trading post continued its evening routines, people going about their business, the ordinary miracle of life carrying on. And in that moment, Lorraine understood that this was the truest victory. Not the dramatic escape or the burial of dark magic, but this quiet choice to embrace life fully, to build and love and trust despite all the reasons she had been given not to. The desert wind swept across the compound, carrying the scent of approaching autumn, and Lorraine smiled into it, no longer running, no longer hiding, just standing firm on ground she had earned through blood and tears and the stubborn refusal to let darkness define her story. The ending was just another beginning, and it was hers to write. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.